In South Africa, there's a distinct gap in financial literacy. Many up-and-coming athletes and even seasoned professionals lack the knowledge and skills to secure long-term financial well-being. Now, Investec believes that education is one of the most powerful tools to creating enduring worth. As a trusted financial partner for athletes and their supporters, it's committed to equipping athletes and you at home with the information, guidance, and skills we all need throughout our wealth creation journeys. Hello, I'm Motheo Khoaripe, host of Everything Counts Sports Edition. Over the past 4 episodes, we've heard from athletes across rugby, football, golf, and athletics, all with very different journeys, but facing some very similar realities when it comes to money. Now, most of us aren't professional athletes, but the reality is the lessons around money, pressure, and long-term planning apply far beyond sport. So today we're taking a step back. We're joined by 3 Investec experts to unpack some of the key themes that emerge through our episodes and to help us understand what athletes are really up against when it comes to financial decision making. Joining me are Springbok World Cup winner turned Investec Wealth Manager Schalk Brits, alongside Investec Financial Advisor Vumi Dludlu and Wealth Manager Moses Bokaba. Schalk, I want to start with you. I think one of the key themes that we picked up from the 4 conversations we've had is the fact that you retire at 38. Many of us would love to do that, but there's also the worry of what happens after sport. Do I have enough money to last me another 20 years raising my kids, building wealth for my family? So how did you deal with those conversations as you were going through your career?
You ask teammates, and sometimes it's not the right advice. I guess when people watch this episode, I hope the following thing hits the heart. It is the perception that athletes earn enough. And when you hear a bad story, it's normally, the guy was spending it on money or booze.
What did he do with it?
What did he do with it? The unfortunate reality is, just from a structural perspective, is it's pay as you earn, mostly all of it. So 45%, there goes. In the UK, it's 50%. The reality is the first couple of years, you do make bad decisions. Then it's the second thing is you get a lot of private equity opportunities that you invest in or think you invest in. The one problem is you can't quantify the risk when you make a private equity investment. And so a lot of guys to the end of their career is like, what's next? I need to find a next job. And the biggest question is, do I have enough? And if you can't determine what's enough is, like going into their finances, understanding what is expense, what's income, and how must I structure it at, and you retire at the worst possible time ever. You're normally between the age of 30 and 35, or in general. The reality is most of them has either got married, got a husband or a wife, the kids are young, so the expenses start ramping up quite quickly. And if you don't understand cash flow, that is a proper conundrum you deal with.
For your career, right? Vumi, let me bring you in here. A normal intern in a corporate setting walks in, they're 22 years old, they're starting their financial journey, they'd like to save. A bit of a more conventional conversation you can have with them in terms of just how much time they have in the market in terms of growing their wealth. But if it's an athlete at 22, they're walking in with, let's say, 3 million rand. And they've got all this money, they feel very cash flush, but a lot of mistakes can still happen there.
Absolutely. And I think when you take an individual from a conventional career, so corporate, for instance, you've got about 30 to 40 years. So you have the ability to make mistakes and still recover financially. But when you look at an athlete, one mistake can be detrimental. And that can be a financial mistake, but that can also be a mistake from an injury, which can really affect your financial plan. So if you don't have a financial plan early on, when you start your career, it really can be detrimental.
It then becomes a bespoke approach in terms of athletes. Someone tells you, look, I think I feel very healthy. I should be in this for about 15, 20 years. What does money look like for me? How can I make sure that by the time I hang up my boots, I'm in the right position?
I think the perfect answer to that is financial planning and starting early. I think one of the biggest mistakes athletes make is thinking they've got time, which not necessarily. And so the concept of time is very important, especially when it comes to the investments piece around financial planning, because that's where the compounding interest over time makes a massive, massive difference.
Moses, looking at, a sports star, top of their game, they're earning quite well. The vulnerability of making poor money decisions, even when you earning a lot of money.
When you're an athlete, your mindset is built very differently. It's all about performance. You succeed against all odds. There's obviously a very competitive environment, which is all great. In fact, even from a psychological perspective for an athlete, that can actually work against you from an investment and savings perspective, because you don't play because you're playing for the next 20 years. You're playing for the next game. You're playing for this next weekend. You're going to be on the field. You understand who you're competing against. So you're very much looking into short term. And because you're looking into very short term, a lot of energy goes into short term. But when we come in, as a wealth manager, to really try and be part of the athlete's team. An athlete, you've got a coach, you've got a caddy, you've got a physio, You've got a great team around you. Equally on the financial and investment side, you need to have a great sound team. So as a wealth manager, we try and help these athletes and understand their psychological thinking around sport, what money really means to them, because they really focus on the short term and we try and assist on the long term. So if I'm playing rugby or golf or cricket, I'm focusing on the next World Cup, the next T20. I'm not looking for the next 20, season. 30, 40 years. And that's really what wealth is about. When you get your first paycheck, it's not wealth. In fact, that's the foundation of starting wealth preservation. So the psychology of athletes is quite interesting because it comes in quite quick and it ends quite quick.
It's very tough then when you talk about the psychology, and Schalk, I want to bring you in here. Because as a sports person, as an athlete, your career is very public.
Yeah.
So tomorrow the papers or online media says, look, Schalk is now making 10 million rand from this particular season. Everyone knows you've got the money. The calls start coming in. How do you deal with that psychologically as an athlete to say, I still need to keep this money for me and not necessarily give it away to everyone who calls me for it?
I think the reality, unfortunately, is the following. People don't understand. Sometimes they support a community.
Yeah.
They support their mother, their father, their uncle, aunt, brother, sister, whatever that might be, because they are coming to money, and you feel unbelievable loyalty to the people around you, because they were the ones when it was tough at school to get you at 6 o'clock to a training session or to whatever that might be, the emotional support, the financial support. We don't know that background, and everyone's got their own little story. And so a lot of that is extremely hard to articulate, to understand where money has gone, because sport has got the power to uplift the community, but sometimes to the detriment of the individual. The unfortunate reality of sport is it can take a point of a second, can change your life, literally, of winning a race or coming second or third. And if you look at team sports, it's one goal, one try, one selection, one bad game. So that is the constant feedback we're trying to get the whole time from athletes. Like when the corporate world, your feedback loop is maybe quarterly or half yearly or yearly, it is every time you're on the pitch, there's a feedback loop, positive and negative.
So it's a very small margin there that you're working with as a sports person. But Vumi, when you come to talking about money, how can athletes think differently when it comes to working with their money? Yes, they've got the stats sorted out. They know how quick they are. They know what to eat in terms of their nutrition.
How strong
they are, right? So how do you structure that when it comes to finances then, in terms of managing your money?
I'll just echo what Moses touched on, which is having a team as part of your support. And that would be also a part and parcel of that, a financial team. So they can focus on being on the field, on the course, or whatever the case, but the team is then focused on walking that financial journey with them. And I think when you think of financial planning, it shouldn't be around course correcting when the mistake happens. It should be part of the foundation and working and taking family into account. So from an insurance perspective, if we break it down a little bit more, if you think of an athlete as a main breadwinner, when you think of it from an insurance perspective, we need to then have the conversation around the athlete understanding that they're the biggest asset to themselves and the family. So how do we protect that biggest asset? Because should something happen to the breadwinner, being the athlete, everything else crumbles, especially because with some families, maybe the spouse supports the athlete and there's already one income household. So those are the conversations we need to consider quite intensely. So now that one income has gone away because maybe of an injury or whatever the case is, now it goes from one income household to nothing at all. So when we talk financial planning, those are the conversations we have to have with the athlete. And I suppose from a foundation perspective, before we even speak on saving, investing, and the whole financial plan, that's where the relationship is important between the financial advisor, wealth manager, banker, and the client. Because if you don't understand the athlete, their world, the family that they come from, and the family that they're building, it's very hard to start talking cash flow, budgeting, and holistic financial planning.
Moses, as a person that's managing the wealth, there is a limited window period where the money is going to come in. So how do you make sure that with the lump sum that you're getting, you can build a wealth story that's going to be well beyond the years of the athlete's activity?
Taking from where Vumi left off earlier, around understanding the ecosystem, understanding the client, understanding who the client supports, who their support structure is. You take an example, you're earning from an offshore opportunity, a contract, and a lump sum comes in. And I mentioned earlier that the income or the lump sum or the contract that comes in could be quite limited. You don't know if you'll make next year or 5 years' time. So it does become quite challenging, purely because, number one, you need to really understand what the support structure looks like. Number two, you also need to ensure that you understand what the client's requirements are, what the athlete's requirements are. So you can't now all of a sudden invest for the long term, because you need to manage cash flow. You need to manage tax, cross-border taxes, currency. Do we bring funds back locally? Do we take funds offshore? What is the purpose of that? Two distinctions. One is you need to create a pot of savings. So, that we call a liquidity component. And that liquidity component will take care of your next 3 to 6 months, as an example. And then thereafter, the surplus can start to integrate a solution, whether it's a local or an offshore solution, to ensure that should there no longer be income, we've got a buffer that's growing. And I think, even outside of an athlete's life, this is just on a general basis as an individual. The savings component will take care of your short-term needs. 3 to 6 months is somewhat what you want to look at. Emergency funds, travel. For an athlete, you probably need to pay your staff, your team. So that, is it your caddy? Is it your physio? More importantly, you say, well, for the next 6+ months, you need to start thinking around inflation. Your career could be 5, 10, if you're lucky, like Schalk, 20 years. So the way we think and try to assist clients is, one, what is the family structure? Number two is really understanding the earning potential. So what's coming in, and try to preserve that, because a saving is not wealth. A saving means I'm saving for a particular reason for the next 3 to 6 months. But what then after? So we kind of think of, your 3 to 6 months is your liquidity component. And then there's this big, beautiful piece in the middle called prosperity. You have to build a life of prosperity to ensure that should one day I retire, I've got something to live off for my family, for my kids. And then there's this third last component called legacy. Legacy means many things to many people. For an athlete, it's obviously very difficult, because if I'm playing for 5 to 10 years and I'm getting this chunk of capital, I need to ensure that I'm structuring correctly. I'm partnering with the right people. I understand from a tax perspective, what does it all mean? I mean, you getting a contract comes in, an athlete is probably going to see, 55% of those earnings. Hopefully there's no further tax leakages or cost leakages, but you need to understand around short-term, medium, and long-term. If I just sort of paraphrase it, as liquidity, prosperity, and legacy. So you're building for further than beyond sport.
The amount of players that I know, or athletes rather, that's got money in a bank account, and I mean a lot of money in a bank account, not working for them, not understanding inflation, but the fear of deploying it is a lack of trust. because you don't know what you don't know.
So you don't want the money to move, rather
because
keep it.
Yeah, because the reality is yes, I'm building this pot, and every time I go to, well, back in my days, it was you go to the ATM and you draw the card and you look at the slip of availability, right?
Still there.
Is it still there? Yeah, so it's still there. Yes, baby, and it's increasing every time with every match fee. And then the reality now where you go is, okay, fine, you look on the bank app, awesome, this is what's in my bank. But the fear of deploying or let that money work for you, it is hard. And then trusting to give you money to the right people. And unfortunately, in this world of finances, there is some that is very trustworthy, and there is some that is extremely, that we know in the market, is extremely untrustworthy.
Yeah, too good to be true. Yeah.
Or go speak to that uncle or that brother. He knows what to do with the money. But the reality is they don't. Or they don't have institution to be behind them, and then gone.
Vumi, I'm going to throw you the ball here in terms of managing that trust, right? You speak to an athlete and they have those concerns to say, yes, I have this pool of money, but can I trust that the earnings over time that you talk about are going to be realized?
It's so easy for us to maybe sit here now and say, invest locally and offshore, but what does that mean? So the educational piece around the why is very crucial as well, because markets do fluctuate, and for a new investor, that can be very frightening, as expected. But once the educational piece has been done correctly as part and parcel of that relationship, it really can change things around. And just to add on to that, once the trust is there, it's easier and more effective to have yearly financial reviews, because it's also really critical that when something changes in the athlete's life, that they are aware that the first point of contact, or one of the first points of contact, is to alert the financial advisor or wealth manager, because that then does change a few things in the overall financial plan. That could be getting married, having a child, getting a sponsorship, or perhaps moving overseas to Japan, which changes the whole picture.
Having a fascinating conversation with our experts, talking money and sports. And when you come back after this break, we're going to be talking about having the discipline on and off the field.
It was my first trip abroad since having children, and my husband stayed home to look after the kids. I was nervous to leave them, but with family banking from Investec, I knew he had all the access he needed for anything that might come up. It's reassuring to know that Investec has our family covered.
Investec. Now that's private banking.
Welcome back to Everything Counts Sports Edition, talking now the psychology of money, looking at that discipline. Often, athletes, the most disciplined people, they eat well, they are at practice on time, and they know what to do on the field in terms of discipline, right? But why does it not translate, Schalk, when it comes to money? Because their behavior then can tend to be a little bit different. They can look for bigger engines and live a very, very fast life off the field.
The first day when I got a contract was 50,000 Rand at Western Province Rugby Union. I could not believe someone's going to pay me to play something I love doing. And then eventually, as it increases, you like, after the studies, I'm like, okay, I have to reward myself a little bit. And the thing is, you don't ever know what is enough or what's too little. Like that thing. And then it's like, well, this guy's, your friends is like getting paid. They've supported you. Kind of like, I want to take you out for dinner. I have a couple of beers.
Yeah.
And that happens frequently as well. But the reality is, that's where a great advisor comes in, someone that actually understands the sacrifices you made. It's not just saving everything. You have to have a little bit of fun. That's the reality of it. You have to enjoy the fruits of your profession, but not to the detriment of your future earnings.
Yeah. Moses, managing the psychological factors of that, right? You're getting a lot of money at a very young age, and it's 0 to 100. How do you not make the poor money decisions?
I think it's a case of really understanding the psychology and the ecosystem of that particular athlete. You know, you can look at a footballer, you can look at a rugby player, you can look at a golfer, you can look at a Paralympian, an athlete. They've got very different circumstances within the ecosystem. So maybe just as an example, I mean, a footballer, You typically get a contract, there's a little bit of stable income and its salary. And just purely looking at that footballer, there's obviously certain things that you can kind of structure. So what do I mean by that? You know that for a 3-year contract, you're earning X. You know that performance, bonuses, winning matches, it's obviously not guaranteed, but what you do know is the contract that you're getting. So if I just solely focus on a football as an example, that salary coming in, similar to what I do, being employed here at Investec Wealth Investment International, I've got a plan with what's coming in for the next 2 years. So I can structure and say, based on my earnings, this is what I'm going to do with my money. This is what's important for me. So it's really understanding, number one, the psychology and the ecosystem of that particular sport, because there's quite a bit of complexity. You look at a golfer, for example. A golfer is very different to a footballer. The way I see a golfer is kind of running a small business. What do I mean by that? You basically have to fund your own expenses. You have to fund your travels. You have to ensure that you are paying your coach, your caddy, and it's also performance-based because it's also not guaranteed.
Your winnings also
I'm going to play on
team.
Thursday. I'm hoping to make the cut on Friday so that I can play for the weekend. Even if you make the cut on the Friday, it doesn't mean and guarantee that you're going to make a winning come Sunday. You can come last, and whatever amount you're earning, you came last, even though you made the cut, still doesn't meet your objectives from an expense perspective. Cover your expenses. What you're trying to build is obviously very different for each type of athlete. So I think before you even get to the solution, what's really critical for us is understanding the client. We really tailor every single solution per individual, per family, based on their circumstances. So it's not a case of product selling because we can really offer anything underneath the sun. What does a client need? What are their circumstances? From then on, you can really build a great structure. You can integrate discipline. Discipline obviously will then mature, which then creates wealth. And then also it becomes tangible over a period of time. An athlete kind of comes into this world and it's performance-based and it's all about, I want to be better than this. I want to be on top of this because there's an opportunity. It's very short term, right? And that works against them when you start to think about long term, because long term is not about the next thing. Long term is about discipline. So there's a bit of structure that needs to be put into place and really understanding the client's circumstances. So the psychology is around the different disciplines of sport, which comes with very different circumstances.
And with regards to that, it is within the Investec Sports strategy is trying to understand not just the client, because every client's different, but the external factors that plays a part within each different sport, because you have to look at the client. But let's use a simple example. If you drive, and I can remember this, I bought a second-hand Peugeot 207 at an auction, like literally a little bit being stingy. But the reality is when you drive into the car park and there's other cars sitting there, you're like, okay. So it's when you come up I can almost say the food chain within the team, the younger guy coming in, and you see all these guys got all these nice cars, and you're like, okay, they've made it. I need to fit in here.
For me, managing that spending behavior, you drive into practice and the guys have Hiluxes and all these other big engines, and you here with your little Peugeot, you just started out. There's a lot of pressure. I think it's a great example, right? The public expectation, firstly, but also the pressures of maintaining who you are. You are now a personality and you feel you should be living a certain way. So how do you manage those expectations?
A lot of athletes' success, and I suppose any individual, you often think it translates to support, and it doesn't. It's a privilege to be able to support your family and community. I really think it is. However, it's also crucial to understand that same generosity without structure can actually put you on the back foot from a financial planning perspective and a wealth generation perspective. And I think it really goes back and ties up well with what I mentioned earlier, is understanding that protecting yourself as an asset from an income protection perspective, a liquidity perspective, and a wealth creation perspective actually then in turn allows you to be able to take care of your family and community for a longer period rather than intermittently or once off.
In our previous episode with our ambassador, Akayuru Mudli, I asked her around the pressures of performing on the field while you have also financial pressures to handle off the field. And Schalk, I want to know from you, when the money's not coming in, when you're feeling like you're under pressure financially, does that also affect your psychology and also how you perform on the field?
Surely it does. The big stressful points is when you get injured, how long you're injured for. Then there's contract negotiations, and if you get injured close to contract negotiations, your bargaining power goes down. But talking to friends within the industry, those stresses that you take during your career, when it's going well and when it's going badly, is compounded when there's responsibility towards a family that you have to look after, a brother, a sister, a wife, and kids. The reality is, how much you earn and what your financial position is has always got an influence on the back of your mind of the performance on the pitch. And that's sometimes very fearful of. We see athletes going, like the reality is 2/3 of all athletes go into financial difficulties while they play, and 2/3 of them go into financial difficulties 5 years after they finish. And that's why you need experts that understands the psychology of money, the real solutions on the financial side. What is the risk involved in that? What products or what solutions you need to take out if you get injured and you can't pay your mortgage, or you get income protection, all those things around it, and then your tax liability that people don't think about.
Yeah.
And then you still have to score in the field, of course.
Yeah,
all
baby.
of that.
But that's the best part. And,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, this is the reality: is people. It's easier not to look at the problem or sort it out and say, "I'll do it tomorrow," or put my head in the sand and say, "Well, it will get sorted." But the reality is that liability will always be there, and it plays on the back of your mind.
So, Vumi, how should athletes then think about, managing their family and also the pressure of being the athlete? Just that whole financial plan where they can bring in their spouse into, what's going on financially, and also just managing the wealth creation for the family.
I think that's a really important question, Motheo, purely because the educational piece shouldn't just lie with the athlete. It should be an educational piece that also the spouse understands. This is where estate planning comes into play.
Yeah.
So depending on the marital regime, whatever the spouse does could have a direct impact on the assets and liabilities of the athlete as well. So from an estate planning perspective, the spouse is crucial there, and they also need to understand that whatever changes in their world, whether it's what Schalk mentioned with them possibly traveling with the athletes, so maybe putting their career on hold, what that actually even means later on when it's time for estate liquidity.
Of that,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And as the athlete, or maybe the athlete and their spouse, accrue assets along the way, which is exactly what's going to happen. It sounds all good and well, but when you look at it from an estate planning perspective, do you have enough liquidity at the end, even after you've accrued all these assets? So estate liquidity is also a really important piece, and the spouse plays part and parcel of every part of that journey too.
On the back of that, I take maybe for you, Schalk, as an example, with your experience having played overseas. You would have earned overseas. You would have faced a few challenges. In fact, you don't know what you don't know, right? So you earn in hard currency, but what do you do with that hard currency? Do you bring it back into South Africa? Do you keep it offshore? Is it earned in your personal capacity? Is it earned in an offshore structure? All of these things have got an impact around the structuring. So structuring is very, very critical. Understanding the jurisdictions that you're currently playing in, the residency around that. Don't quickly go buy property in an offshore jurisdiction, because there could be tax implications. There could be cost leakages that you're just not aware or familiar with. So when you're structuring, or when we are assisting clients as a wealth manager with their offshore structuring, as an example, and on the local side, but just touching on the offshore structuring, it's equally important that we understand the tax implications or the ecosystem within those jurisdictions to ensure that it's still in line with your investment objectives. So when you're walking a journey with a client, an athlete, the spouse, very critical, it is very important that there is a plan and that the plan can actually be followed. So we get quite excited, actually. This is my passion point around having direct impact for legacy, to see a sports person, an athlete really thrive beyond sport, because it starts from the beginning. Things look very different when you're international. So from a structuring perspective is very important. And perhaps maybe just to zoom into what is structuring. I mean, I think we're using a bit of jargon, saying structuring. Structuring really means keep things quite simple, equally ensure that you understand from a tax perspective what that looks like. And then you also have to ensure that you're building a roadmap from a savings perspective, from a wealth perspective. You need to be thinking beyond 20-year plus, the career you had, around the compounding effect, because that is really powerful. As an athlete, you're just looking one step in front of the other. You're not looking beyond 20, 30, 40 years, but you've got 15, 20 years of wealth accumulation to last you for the rest of your life. You've got a responsibility back at home. You've got kids, you've got aspirations. You need to ensure that your kid will be okay one day. I think it's just take it back and really understanding what is the client's ecosystem, what are the impacts, and how do you structure around that? So that's critically important. And obviously where Vumi and the team comes in is also around the financial planning perspective. Are walls in place, insurance policies, etc., etc. So similar to a athlete, you need a strong team around you that will ensure that they've got best interest.
As early as possible, make sure that the structuring is right, because at the end, the egg is bigger, because at the end, when you have to change the structures, there's a lot of money flowing, not to you, not to your kids, not to your friends or family. It flows to the tax man. And the reality is, if you can make sure that little egg that you accumulate in your playing careers, that it stays that size for your kids and for your wife, either when you pass away or when you use it for something else, because that is where I think a lot of athletes don't know that the structuring part is vitally important to make the egg bigger at the end. And that's as simplistic as I could say, because when you try to do it at the end of your career, oh my goodness, it is expensive.
It can be a very, very big curveball. That was, of course, Schalk, Vumi, and Moses. Thank you for this particular episode where we covered just the real challenges that sports people face when it comes to managing their money. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about wealth creation beyond sport. Do join us for that.
The views expressed are those of the contributors at the time of publication and do not necessarily represent the views of the firm and should not be taken as advice or recommendations. Investec Private Banking, a division of Investec Bank Limited, a registered credit provider committed to the Code of Banking Practice as regulated by the National Financial Ombudsman.